Hey everyone, welcome to Pursuit of Infinity. I'm your host Josh, and if you're listening to the audio version, you would have heard a short introduction to our guest today. But if you're watching the video, I'm here today with Seth Harris. Seth, thank you so much for joining me today, man.
Yeah, it finally happened. Thanks for having me on.
Yeah, we went back and forth a little bit. I just had some tech issues for a while, but we're here, we're doing it. You had me on your podcast a little while ago. That's effing weird, which is amazing. So everybody go check that out. Great podcast. You guys cover a lot of awesome topics. And when I came on your podcast, I expected to educate you guys on psychedelics because I wasn't really sure like where you guys were at. But then you popped on and you just had all this knowledge of esoteric and occult stuff along with psychedelics, which surprised me. So how'd that all start for you?
Okay, well, first I owe you an apology. We had you on That's Effing Weird, and despite like three people supposedly having to back up stuff and having files, we lost your file and never were able to upload it. So we want you back at some point because that was an awesome conversation. I think it was like 3 hours long. Um, but my background, I don't know. I mean, maybe like post. I grew up in pretty sheltered environment, and and realizing that at the time I had complaints, but as I've gotten older, I appreciate that sheltered environment or the at least the the wanting to create that for me, and as an adult, I very much appreciate it, but at the time, uh, I was just trying to kinda break out of and just understand as much as I could on my own, and so, like, mushrooms were floating around, research chemicals were floating around, weed and alcohol, and there's definitely in the whole umbrella of psychedelics, they can absolutely, cause problems, but they also have huge benefits to them. It's like any tool ever, like social media is, a great tool if you use it wisely, but it can also be just a horrible detriment to your life. Same thing with anything is kind of my philosophy. But yeah, I think the first crazy time I ever had with psychedelics was probably Salvia divinorum, smoking those extracts, completely peeled reality apart, and then, oh, let's see, I think right after that, it was, psilocybin, and then a few research chemicals, and just a lot of use of that stuff, and then I took, like, this long break because it was just too much. I had to, like, clean up my life and organize everything, and then, uh, I started to cultivate and microdose, uh, 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 mushrooms, and, they are awesome for that, but I did that like a microdose, 5 days a week for, a year or more, and, then I had to back off of that because that can be kind of, uh, anxiety inducing depending on what's going on in your life, but yeah, I think they're an amazing tool and can absolutely, promote, like, neuroplasticity and a curious mind and getting your internal self all organized and right, yeah. There's a little bit of it.
So what were some of your experiences like? Because people might hear you say things like it helps you get your life in order, helps you to maybe ignite your curiosity. So how, in your view, does it do that?
Okay, well, I think that everybody on some level is aware of all their flaws. We all have them, and, whenever I'm in a altered state, those flaws are, magnified times 10, and it's basically all I can think about. So looking at yourself in that kinda mirror or context can absolutely, um, if it's, like, so debilitating that you're not happy with what you're seeing. I don't really see I guess there's probably 2 different people, they completely stop and just equate it to that experience or that's not for them. But I really do think that, if you stay in it and try to, "Okay, all these things I don't like about myself, well, maybe I should focus on that and fix it." and maybe a psychedelic experience won't be as terrifying. And for me, that's true. You got to kind of clean house and take some accountability of yourself. But yeah, those things can radically uh, leave an impression on you. As far as experiences, I'll go back to like Salvia Divinorum, which is an extremely interesting one because through different documentaries, and I believe what's his name, Morris, the guy that does those psychedelic documentaries on compounds, Hamilton Morris.
Hmm.
He actually did like later on, like this is years after I had salvia. He did like a deep dive on the region where it's from, the local cultures that used it generationally, and in the West, or up here, we use it way differently. So it's basically legal in most states, but it's like in this really weird gray area. And it has like, what we do is we have like the leaves, and then we have extracts that we basically spray on the leaves, so you can get like 5x, 10x, whatever, and get different concentrations of the active compound, which I forget the actual name of it, but through later on, kind of looking into the research on it, it's a dissociative drug, and used properly in low doses, I've heard that it can help people with like body dysmorphia and stuff, because it can separate like yourself from that, and kind of disassociation not, isn't always a good thing, but in this context, in going in with intention and bite-sized amounts, it does seem like it has benefits for people, which is just cool. There's like all of these compounds that just exist in nature, that when you go into it and with a certain intention, has all kinds of different benefits and outcomes. But yeah, so salvia was historically used as a chew, kind of like how we would chew tobacco. And it wasn't at high enough doses to do what the smoking the extracts will do to you. Um, but it will release a ton of dopamine, and then have like a dissociative effect. And everyone that does it that way kind of reports a big euphoric kind of experience. Um, but if then when you get into the extracts, it's crazy. So whatever it may basically makes you hyper dream while you're awake. That's the best way I can describe it. So with mushrooms, colors are morphing, shapes and two-dimensional things, or like if you're looking at a page, like the words will kind of start to holographically project. But it's not like that. So like on salvia, if you're watching a movie, or for instance, you can you'll see all this stuff, like if you were dreaming, bleed into your like conscious perception. So I remember smoking it, and like I had this feeling of the couch arm kind of fusing with my head. Things were moving all around me. I remember this one intense experience was when um I was walking around in my apartment, and I had these floors, but I kept seeing all these shadows dart across the as if something was flying above me. But when I would look up, the ceiling, I had white ceilings, like they were just painted white. There was no ceiling; it was just darkness. It was like a night sky; just nothing was there. And there were all of these root systems. And I don't know how much of this is like perceptions of back then, like drug culture, or what people say. So I don't know how much of that kind of backlog bled into this, but I remember there were these root systems all around the baseboard of my apartment, and they would symmetrically, there would be these kind of pillars that would grow up of vines, and they would be uh like Native American heads, but without the jaw. It would basically be like just the head and the palate, and no jaw, and they were all growing from these vines, like uh in very evenly spaced columns all around the house. There was no roof. It was just blackness, but anytime I looked at the floor, it was, things were flying around. The shadows of something above me were darting all around, and I would look up and there was nothing there. Um, so that was crazy. Um I remember, uh, in the midst of a trip, I remember calling my mom and saying I thought people were in an air vent, and she was like, "What are you talking about?" It just like it was, I probably scared her a few times, and I've since then I've apologized to her. I'm like, "Sorry, I kinda went off the deep end, mom." But yeah, I remember being convinced people were in the air vents, and I was asking questions like, "Why?" And all of this stuff that just doesn't make any sense, like dream logic in the waking world. And then, um, I remember watching some movie and, my floor turned into, like, a bird's nest. So it was just, like, completely crazy stuff. I remember was one time, uh, I had my head on, like, the couch arm that kinda my head fused with, and there was, like, a, Ferris wheel that was rotating at, like, sideways, but the chairs and all of the ends of the Ferris wheel were rotating into my head and then out. Um, so yeah, that was salvia for me.
Wild, man. I've never taken salvia, but I have heard people who've had similar experiences. My brother told me about an experience where he was outside and like he just was looking at the grass after he smoked it and he saw like just the grass kind of moving side to side and he was like, "Oh man, that's cool, that's neat." And it was like dancing, and then just everything just fell apart from there, like his whole reality just began to peel off. Like you said, it's like it just peels apart your reality. And to me, like the benefit of that is like realizing that reality isn't what we're looking at here. It's not just what we perceive with our senses. There's something out there that's like on a higher level. It makes me think of reality as like a field of information or something like that. And like currently what we're doing right now is we're intaking that information with our five senses. We're just defining the world based off of that, based off of our physical ability to survive. And then when you take a psychedelic like salvia, LSD, DMT, psilocybin, it shows you that there are other ways of interpreting the information field. And to me, that was just amazing. That blew my entire reality apart and like ignited my curiosity and got me into like a lot of other things that I would never have delved into before, like religion, Buddhism, esoteric, occult stuff. So I assume that probably did the same thing to you. What kind of stuff did it get you into, and how did it ignite your curiosity?
It definitely ignited curiosity, just all of those things. I mean, well, you have experiences like that, and you got a lot of questions at the end of it. Like, it's like, I mean, the classic one is, well, how much of that is my brain versus, is any of that real? Like, c like, we have our brain is this extremely, uh extremely good at filtering out background information just for survival's sake. Uh, uh, I think that if we had the full scope of reality, like the vessels we're in would just be inoperable. There would be so much information coming in. We just would forget to eat, be eaten by a predator. Like there's just so much going on. And then you think I mean the whole and I think we had this conversation. It's like the physical body. If you were to kind of think of it as tuning a radio that tunes in to a frequency. Yeah, we have a very limited bandwidth on what that frequency is. So those kind of questions are like, how much of what I just saw or experienced is real? Is my physical body's tuning into whatever reality frequency, whatever that is, however you want to explain it, is it picking up things that are there but we normally filter out? Or is it just a bunch of wires getting crossed in the brain? I don't know, but those kind of questions, and I always was kind of a curious person or a kid, but that just kind of drew my attention to a whole kind of other world of questions that I probably wouldn't have gotten into. But yeah, like alchemical stuff, all of that stuff is fascinating because you know, you scratch into it and it kind of is like you know, even something like the Philosopher's Stone is definitely, you know, people misinterpreted that as or the whole thing as transmuting baser elements into gold, but, what I think really what it was transmutation of suffering into something useful, or, you know, those kind of things. Basically, ancient coping mechanisms, kinda put in this high art form and kinda, philosophical context to navigate this kind of place you're just dropped into. Because if you really think about it, it's really strange. Just existing period is very, very weird. Uh and the I'm not gonna give any credence to all these different theories of, like, these scientific theories on space and reality and the planet or anything. I think just if you look at it as if you're a kid and you know nothing, 'cause we I don't my opinion is we know extremely very, very little. Uh, it's just extremely strange that we even exist and uh, are thinking and conscious and like that just that idea that you're on a, like this kind of theory. I'm not saying it's right or wrong, but it's like you're on a spherical rock, uh, possibly just floating in a giant black void, revolving around a ball of fire, and your rock just happens to have enough mass to create a dent supposedly in space and time that gives way to a phenomenon we call gravity that is just the right amount to coalesce a breathable atmosphere of gases around you. It's crazy because if you think about it that way, it's like we're on a, giant, um, huge spaceship with, and plants are like basically the, uh, life support system for oxygen and food and everything. It's really weird. It's basically we're in a sci-fi. Hate to break it to everybody.
It's wild, yeah, and it's interesting when you look up at space, or even when you look at any sort of like scientific paradigm that is built around space. As you said, you know, we identify gravity, gravitational waves, and all of these things. But when you look at space for what it is, like what the hell is all this shit up there? Like we don't even have any conception, because it seems like, for like, where I start with this is like the Gaian hypothesis, like that Gaian mind idea, where there's like a the earth is its own organism, and it has its own intelligence, its own consciousness, and it sort of births us along with all the other plants and animals, and we all sort of have our own role to fill within the life cycle of the earth. And if you look at the rest of the solar system, you can sort of see, and you can get like a pattern recognition, because that's what we are really. Humans are pattern recognition animals, you know. We recognize patterns in our environment in order to survive, and we can see some patterns in space, which is fine. But what is space really? That's like the ultimate question for me. Like, what's the purpose of gravity? What is the purpose of us moving around the sun in the way that we do, and what's the purpose of the larger picture of a galaxy? And it's just it's strange, man, because we grow up thinking that we have a handle on this stuff because we learn, you know, certain things from school, certain theories and whatever, but we really have no idea what the hell is going on out there.
No, no. Um, okay, so I love conspiracy theories. It's at the very least, it is a, imagination fuel for me to just delve into several different ones, and what you said kinda reminded me, like, it like, I start thinking of in terms of nature, and because you were, like, talking how the Earth is alive. So like Paul Stamen's research in mycology and the Japanese research on slime molds, and how like something like mushrooms, mycelium, all of that stuff have these interconnected webs of basically like earth internet, that where plants and microorganisms can communicate, roots tie into that and communicate, the trees communicate, they send signals. There's like all these crazy processes I didn't even know existed, like uh b- uh roots send out signals to mushrooms with via different types of sugars, knowing like the fall. It's like not temperature triggered. It was something else. I don't quote me on that, but basically just the basic idea that trees communicate with the mycelium communicate with each other. They let whenever there's dead organic matter around, they alert all the other mycelium guys. They network and then they break it down to where it's viable nutrients for them, and also the byproducts are viable nutrients for tree roots. I mean, the whole thing's just crazy. And then you get into like those videos on different platforms like grounding, like the guy that had a voltage meter that he plugged into the ground and showed what it read when he was connected to it and when it was connected to the ground, versus in a shoe and not a shoe. And so you do that and you create like a low voltage circuit between you and the earth when you ground. And I know that kind of sounds like woo woo to some people, but I'm someone that likes like data. Like I like to see that voltage meter reading something, and and at least the humility to admit, well, I don't know what the long-term effects of uh exposing my feet to like the earth's biorhythms versus never doing that. So I work in construction and remodel type stuff, so I've got a voltage meter and I tried it and it does work. If you're wearing a shoe, you get nothing. You block that circuit. But if you are touching it with your finger and then touch the ground near where it's stabbed into the earth, it will read low voltage. And I think that if we just, the modern age is so cool. Technology, I love it. I think we need to learn how to use it more and be more disciplined. But if we just factored in these basic ideas where we can kind of resync with nature, look at the stars, I think that we got a good recipe for where we're headed, culturally or like science wise. But there's just so much to talk about in this subject matter.
Yeah, there's so much out there, and there's just so much that the scientific paradigm alone can't accomplish and can't get a hold of. That's why I always thought when I look at other cultures, like Amazonian cultures who are, steeped in ayahuasca, who are uh, traveling and mapping out the spirit realms and stuff, I feel like we have to merge the knowledge and the wisdom that they have with our technological prowess. And then we have the wisdom as a foundation to drive our science and to drive our intellectual prowess. So it just seems like we're missing an entire half of the picture
Mhm.
here.
Yeah. Yeah, it would be cool if, um there's like a lot of ivory towers going on. If just I think within the medical industry, within rungs of government, within different types of researchers, I think that if everyone just kind of got over themselves for a minute and just left themselves open to idea. You gotta have you can't have your mind wide open. You gotta have something guarding or filtering out, but you need to have the barn doors open enough to get new ideas in there. And I think if everybody just kind of goes into that mindset, I mean, you could have. I think that another problem is we have specialists in everything. Like you go to school and become a researcher for X. Like we have highly specific um degrees we go for. And so in the scientific community, there's a lot of people that don't want to comment on something they weren't formally educated in, uh, you know, uh outside of their scope. I think that if we had more general education in stuff or had some kind of mechanism that facilitated that more, people would be more comfortable in. Because I mean, imagine if the neuroscience community, like the AI community, the psychedelic research community, the health, fitness, or longevity researchers, just like if everyone communicated more and expressed their opinions without fear of stepping outside of their box, we could get some really cool crossover discoveries.
Yeah, man, absolutely. I mean, there's definitely a place for specialties. We definitely need like a specific type of surgeon that's able to do a specific
Yeah,
type of brain surgery. And, we need these
yeah.
things. But also in the operating room, you want to have somebody who understands near death experiences. You want to have people who understand the religious and spiritual aspect of like coming to death and things like that. Like you want to have all types of viewpoints within the operating room because then, you just have more tools to use. As you said earlier, everything we see around us, everything we use, whether it be, psychedelics or cheeseburgers, man, they're all tools. Everything we use is a tool. And I feel like the more tools we have at our disposal, the better off we are in every facet of reality.
I agree. Yeah. There's there's so many avenues we could go down. But I yes, I absolutely agree. There's a lot of tools in the toolbox. We can't be scared of trying out a new one every now and then.
Yes,
Um,
psychedelics are my absolute favorite tool because they've just been able to introduce me to things that, no other tool has been able to do. Sure, meditation can do it, spiritual practice can do it a lot of times, but man, psychedelics are a fast track directly into that, directly to source.
yeah. Do you have like a protocol?
I do, yeah, and that's actually one of the questions I was gonna ask you, like, what's your protocol? What's your set and setting? And for me, it's, usually what I choose to do mushrooms usually. I do DMT sometimes, I've done LSD once, but mushrooms are my thing, and what I like to do is, turn down the lights, light some incense, have, like, some kind of a little spiritual altar around me, that I can look to. Usually I don't even look at it, but I like to have some things around just in case I need to ground myself. But the concept of grounding to me is sort of counterproductive to a psychedelic experience. To me, like you want to be ungrounded, you want to go out as far as possible. And if you're trying to ground yourself, it seems to me like you're trying too hard to control the experience and you're taking yourself out of that unity and pulling yourself back into the duality. Of course, there are times where you want to ground yourself, but I think just as a general practice, I don't try to ground myself too much. But I like to always play music. Some people like Terrence McKenna would say silent darkness is the way to go. It creates its own music, so you don't really need music if you want to go to those depths. But for me, I really like music because it helps to direct the experience in a way, in a positive way. But yeah, I mean, my protocol is basically low lights, no phones, no keys, and a set of rules for anybody who's participating. Like we have ground rules and we have intentions set beforehand. Nobody is going to get in their car and drive. There are no weapons around. There are, you know, no phones, no obligations. Nobody's going to come to the door. I got my dog, so he's a lunatic. He's a blue heeler border collie mix. So as part of my routine, I got to take him out for a hike first to make sure he's chilling by the time we get down to business. And generally, what I like to do, man, is just lay down in a comfortable place and close my eyes and just allow the experience to unfold. And sometimes that means opening my eyes back up, connecting with the people around me, going outside, looking up at the stars, smoking some ganja is always a part of my tradition as well. Always doing that. But yeah, I like to let the experience guide itself, but generally it's a calm type of environment, not much going on, very comfortable. How about you? What's your protocol?
Okay, so I haven't, as of like super lately, I haven't been on one, but my go-to protocol, all right, well, it depends on if we're talking about like a full-on trip or just microdosing. Microdosing, I gravitate to more higher doses, where I'm gonna be checked out for several hours is a lot more rare for me, especially now. But it's been a few years since I've done that. But yeah, you said like no weapons. That lock up any kind of thing that could cause a potential problem. I can't stress that enough. And phones, yeah, you don't want to like text or call people with like incoherent babble. That's another important one. Um, uh, but in terms of my go-to protocol, I like um I think one of my and this is kind of the background I'm coming from. So like way back when as a kid and high school, post high school, I had trouble with procrastination or there like this kind of feeling like the more pressure something required of me, the more I would like retreat. And I don't like that. I didn't like that about myself. So my go-to would be like coffee, some a microdose of mushrooms, and I figured out kind of where my threshold is of dried ground cubensis in capsules about a gram. About a gram right in there is a sweet spot. If I go over that, my visual field gets too distorted and the inner thoughts become too intense and I'm not productive. But in terms of productivity, coffee, nicotine, and about a gram of dried mushrooms, and exercise. So usually it would be like nicotine. I don't like inhaling anything. I try to keep it as the administration as clean as possible, whether it be a nicotine patch or some kind of sublingual form of nicotine. And I have always, like, really liked stimulants. It just kinda goes with my personality and biology for some reason. So, caffeine, nicotine, about a gram of mushrooms, and then go to the gym and, lift weights, and then start the day, and I'm extremely, I can multitask better than what old Seth would be like. I could, get just more accomplished during the day, or that fear of procrastination leading into just wasted time has become intense enough throughout all of this to where I seize the day way more effectively than I ever used to. Because I mean, the one value any human has is time. That's the biggest asset you've got. Period. I mean, before anything, you know, time leads to understanding. Time can transmute into currency if you know, sell enough of your time to a company or whatever. Uh, but yeah, just focus on your time. And at least for me, that has gotten it to where, or just accomplishing more with the time you're given. Squeeze as much as you can out of that. And that is a very comforting kind of thing that all of this has led to for me.
So what's your microdosing protocol when you do? Do you usually do it like every day, 2 days off, 3 days on? Like I know there's a bunch of different protocols.
Yeah. Yeah, so it has a you get your body gets used to like okay, so if like but before it was a gram, it used to be much less. You can build up a tolerance extremely fast with psilocybin. That's what I've noticed. You don't like okay, even on like the fifth day, that just doesn't pack a punch. So and you got to realize I have like emptied gelatin capsules that I'm measuring stuff out. I know what a gram is. And then sometimes like you know, it's a compressible like, when you grind up a mushroom, it's very compressible. So, when you feel like you're not getting what you were getting at the beginning of the week, you can kinda press more in that gram capsule, um, in terms of density. But it would kinda, like if I'm being exact, it would kinda, like, fluctuate up and down like that. It would probably be about 5 days. Earlier, it would be all the time. After, like, understanding more about it, it seemed like it was a healthy practice to take, like, a 2 or 3-day weekend away from it and get those receptor sites kinda back to normal so you could go back in it again. But it would usually be, about 5 days a week, and that, I think the longest stretch was, like 6 months or 5 months or somewhere in there, I'm, like, ballparking of, like, continual use. Um, but yeah, and I wish there were more studies on long-term effects of that. Um, because I just wanna make sure that even though there's a lot of positive benefits to that tool, that I'm not activating some or unforeseen consequence of, like, wearing out those pathways. Like, I know stimulants, like, you can use, cocaine or Adderall or any of the amphetamines, and it speeds up your, like, neural processing. The speed in which all those neurons are firing are much faster, but, you can build up amyloid plaques, really fast that way, and if you don't have, like, a really good sleep regiment, you could there's a potential that you're not clearing that out, and it could lead to some form of dementia long term. I don't n now, when it comes to psilocybin, I don't think that exactly, but there might be a mechanism because, um, your neurons are definitely firing faster and more of them on psilocybin, especially some of the data I've seen on brain scans. I don't know if it follows the exact same pathways those kind of previously mentioned stimulants do, but, I just wish there were long form studies on that, on brain chemistry or whatever the brain's doing. I mean, you're an electrical being as well as a chemical being. It would just be nice to have, like, long form data and whatnot to know it's not that dangerous long term.
Yeah, I mean, I guess it's known that, or at least it's speculated that psilocybin promotes neurogenesis and promotes the the addition of different neural pathways which allow people to get over traumas, and also like with microdosing allow people to enhance their creativity, enhance their senses and things like that. um but yeah, man, my real interest, because I've tried microdosing before and it was cool, but my main love for psilocybin and psychedelics come from that macro dose, man. um until you know, you have a bad trip, which happens. Have you ever had a quote unquote bad trip?
Oh, yeah, yeah, yeah. It was like, uh oh, it was, like, with a bunch of irresponsible people that didn't take it seriously. It was kind of used as, like, a party okay, well, it was used kind of in a party setting, um, and that kind of chaos while you're in that headspace is it can be troubling. I think the worst one is, there was this person that I got supposedly the, psilocybin crystals from, like, someone had extracted it. In hindsight, I'm not so sure it was psilocybin crystals. I've heard that it can be done, and there's some people that are really good at it, at isolating them, but there is absolutely no way to know if what me and my friend took one time was that. In hindsight, I wonder if it was spiked with who knows what, but it was a very we had, like, it started off like mushrooms. It very much seemed like psilocybin to begin with. It was like the deterioration, and also I at the time, and I still not, I wouldn't know how to dose pure crystals. Like right, even now, I wouldn't know like how much is too much, how much is just right. So like I remember we took a capsule, and you know, too much time had gone by. In reality, I probably had no idea how much time was passing. And then had the mistake of doubling the dose because we were like worried that it wasn't enough. Um, so what and to illustrate, like, there's pill capsule sizes are weird. They're like measured in 00 or 0 or 000. They're like rated like double A batteries. It's a strange way, but I think the zeros, the less zeros, the more capacity it was. And if I had to guess, it was either a 20 or a 30 size pill capsule. So like maybe 500 milligrams somewhere in there, but like two of those. So we're talking like if it was psilocybin crystals, probably, after everything was said and done, close to a gram of pure crystals, which is like completely different than dry fungus. Um, and we had like measures put in place. Like we had Dumb and Dumber queued up on the TV in case things got weird because it was like a funny, comforting movie. And then we had like some music queued up. I remember we listened to the Gorillaz Dare, which was absolutely outstanding, tripping balls. It is like, You Became the Music. I mean, that song on mushrooms is insane, or whatever I was on. So then we had another album queued up, and I remember things started getting weird. He started freaking out and yelling all this kind of crazy stuff, which affected me heavily. I started internally worrying about everything. I remember we finally put on Dumb and Dumber to calm things down, and Jim Carrey or Lloyd's face broke into a bunch of vibrating cubes as he talked. What he was saying made no sense. It was just these fluctuating cubical segmentations of his face, just like splitting and opening and vibrating apart whenever he spoke. That became crazy. We ran out into the parking lot, which was a gravel parking lot, and the gravel just looked like TV static. Um, so at this point, we're freaking out, and we make the worst choice ever by putting on Parliament Funkadelic's Maggot Brain album on surround sound. And to this day, I still feel like I'm about to ease into a trip when Maggot Brain starts, because that song is so, like, burned into my psyche, and it's a horrible feeling. Like, it will literally make me feel like that, that feeling, like that rise where it's like, it's about to happen, like you're going up a roller coaster and you're like, all right, I'm not in control anymore. I get like those kind of beginnings of that feeling whenever that music plays, and I'm stone cold sober, middle of the day, just working, and it gets thrown up on my. I got to remove it from my Spotify playlist just so that doesn't happen. But that song just made the whole night descend into madness. Um, uh, like, he was upstairs screaming nonsense. Uh, I was downstairs trying to like piece my mind back together, and and then he came down and was like wrapped in a. I'm not. I can totally talk about this because I'm not saying his name, but he came down wrapped in a blanket and just started pissing himself. And he like looked at himself while he was pissing, and he looked up at me and he's like, "Is this okay?" And I'm like, it's everything's fine, man. I was just trying to like make sure that everyone was staying sane, but he was just pissing in front of me through his clothes. The floor was getting drenched, and he just had this panicked, like, childlike look on his face, like, "Is this okay?" And so I'm over by the refrigerator trying to piece my mind back together. And the way I was doing it, I had this like this horrible like internal vision where I was at my doctor's, and he was like, he's finally done it. He's broken himself. And like that kind of idea was just spinning around in my head. And so I remember trying to piece my mind back together by trying to go through the mental process of how humans are made. Like, all right, you got a man, and you got a woman, and then I was going through the whole procreation cycle just to like tether myself. I don't know why my mind went to that, but it was like extremely visceral, and just that was what I did to stay sane. And then the night started easing up, and kind of, but you kind of like wake up at the same time, like from the trip, where there's like this really weird transition where all of a sudden your dopamine kind of goes back to normal, and you're in, after all that terror, absolute terror. At least for me, this is my experience, after a horrifying trip and the terror, there is this breakthrough moment where you're just extremely clear-headed, and your dopamine is back. And in reality, I would imagine my dopamine isn't that high. It's just that compared to what my mind just went through, by comparison, it's like so much more pleasant. So there's always like kind of this peaking breakthrough moment of clarity, and then you just kind of slowly wake up back to like normal cognition. Um, but after all that was said and done, he just looked shell-shocked. I left. I drove, and I remember on my way home, I parked in, like, a Dollar General parking lot and just wept. I was just, like, crying. It was so the whole experience was so insane. So in that kind of context, the only thing I will say is, in my opinion, based on my experiences, psilocybin used the wrong way or at high enough doses can absolutely induce some form of PTSD. Um, I mean, it just they're that powerful, but they also can like unwind from what I've heard other types of PTSD. So it's like again back to our both our point. It's a tool of varying uses, and it's unbelievably powerful stuff. It's just crazy that that stuff is just kinda in nature by default and can do that to a person's mind.
Yeah, man. And a lot of people, they claim to like learn the most and have the most profound sort of revelations from those really crazy bad experiences. And I can speak from experience there. You know, I've had my fair share of messed up trips, and I have learned a lot from them, especially respecting the substance, as you said, using it the right way. Because it's like using it the right way is a matter of whether or not you're going to get PTSD or whether or not you're going to cure your PTSD if you have them. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that goes for a lot of psychological ailments. You can really mess yourself up psychologically if you use these tools wrong, but you can also uh, take advantage of just an immense capacity for healing as well.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah, and I'm so much more versed on natural compound like, stuff that exists. I've never had, full-blown acid. I've had research chemicals close to LSD, um, which were weird and more, like, euphoric. It's almost well, growing up, like, MDMA was around, but I knew enough about my brain that I knew it would probably like, that kind of drug would probably be a bad idea for me specifically because my highs are high and my lows are low already. So, I just naturally stayed away from that because I saw how people were just indescribably happy and joyful, and it was like, man, I could not imagine the low point of that for me, like, because I mean, my idea is that most everything is on, like, this frequency scale, and you go up, there's gonna be an equal, uh there's gonna be an equal down to that up on the wavelength, and for me, I stayed away from that, but the closest thing, I think it was, like, something like 2CI, it was something like that, and it was on paper and sublingual, but, I don't know enough about I don't know enough about, LSD or anything like that, or the research chemicals, but the one that I was on was way more euphoric, and you could or at least I could function and think, but there was a lot of visual disturbances, like, you'd see stuff in the corner of your eyes more, and then you would look and it would be gone, or, and then there was just euphoria, so in terms of intense trip like psychedelics, psilocybin and what do you call it? Salvia divinorum, pretty much the things I have the most experience with. I will say that in more modern day Seth, I did try after learning more about Salvia divinorum, I got a little bit of extract and just straight up dried leaves, and prepared a chew that was as close as it's very difficult to get a hold of fresh leaves, but I tried to mimic what the indigenous people in South America do uh, by default with that compound, and it's just chewing it and letting it soak into your mouth, and so I did that with the dry stuff, the only stuff that I could get access to. And, I remember I was actually working in the yard. I was doing yard work, and I was having the best time. I felt very good, but I remember having these, like, I do a lot of, like, video art, so, I kind of daydream while I'm working, or especially if I'm listening to music or something. But, I was listening to some music, and while I just kinda held all this, salvia chew in my mouth, I was having these intense visions for a video that I wanted to do later, and I could see it was, like, extremely specific. There was, like, a back red light, and the camera was looking down a tube, and there was a woman in slow motion in between the backlight and looking down the tube, and it was incredibly vivid. Now, it wasn't like a trip or full-on hallucination, it was just in my mind's eye. I've never seen anything so clear. And so I just stopped the yard work and started working on that, and the resulted video came out way better than I had, ever expected it to match what I saw in my head. Like, it was so crazy how it just matched what I saw in my head. But yeah, it makes me want to use sublingual, salvia more because it's not scary for me. It's not too intense. And I can function, and I'm not gonna try to drive, but I would imagine I could drive on it, but I'm not going to. Um, but I'm just trying to illustrate how much kind of physical body clarity I had. But yeah,
Yeah,
another
definitely.
no sorry for the tangent.
No, no, I love the tangents, man. You mentioned that you called your mom on psychedelics. You know, you've done them with friends and
Yeah.
stuff like that. Do you have a good support system? And like, does your family understand? Are they cool with it?
I mean, of the ones that know I use it in a microdosing capacity, yeah, um in fact, I've convinced some to try it, and, very open-minded people in my family that are, that, I think the only and as at my age now, I think the only thing that, uh, concerned family members are concerned over is, like, reckless use of anything, and, as, like, this version of myself, this age, I mean, it's, like, clear, like, I'm responsible now, and I follow through with things, and I'm not doing things that are just, unstable or outlandish. So in that context, people are, especially curious people are way more apt to listen to the benefits of something, um, so that's the way it is in my family.
Yeah, that's the way it is for me too. Pretty much identical. You know, the people who understand it, they're cool about it. You know, they know that I use it responsibly, and I have introduced it to some of my friends and family as well, which has been amazing. And I introduced it to my fiance. Actually, I talk about this all the time on the podcast, but me and my fiance were going through some rough times a few years back, and we did mushrooms together, and it changed everything. I mean, it healed our
Oh, that's
relationship
awesome.
just in ways that I could never even have imagined beforehand. You know, it allowed us to like connect on a level that was just impossible any other way. We were able to see each other for who we are, our natural, real soul, spirit self, and also touching the divine together is something that I think is very underrated when people talk about psychedelics and doing them in groups. Because man, that just changes everything. Individually, it changed everything for me to touch something that I previously didn't think was possible. Because my whole life I was a staunch atheist. I mean, really hardcore, like hated the idea of religion, of God, of all that stuff. You know, I was the kind of person that would go on the internet, on Facebook, and just like try to seek out arguments to, externally validate myself because I wasn't comfortable with my own skin. I, actually low key probably hated myself. But then, like, after feeling that divine thing, touching source changed my whole life. It changed everything for me. And feeling that with your significant other or with your friends, like, it creates a bond that is unbreakable, man. Even to this day, I have one of my best friends. We took psychedelics together a lot, and we don't talk as much anymore. You know, he has a family, I got my thing going, and we've separated a bit. But when we come back together, man, it feels like no time has passed because that bond that we
Yeah.
were able to create together is just timeless.
Yeah. Yes. Yeah, I would very much I've had, probably not as, I would rate it probably lower than your experience. You seem like you had, like, a really nice, bonding time with your, fiancé. If you trip with a special person, it can be extremely rewarding. I would, 100% agree with that.
Yeah,
There
and
were
I'd
some
imagine it could
distractions,
be.
so I'm rating my experience lower than yours. There was some distractions going on, but the time, that I've had doing that was very nice with, a significant other, but unfortunately, later on, there was, like, a ton of distractions in the house.
Yeah, that happens, man. It's tough. It's so unpredictable too, because when you go into that experience, like when people come to me and they ask me, like, what can I expect with a psychedelic, or like how should I approach it? I just say, like, really, I can't tell you. The only thing I can say is that you're probably gonna have a very profound and very, very powerful experience. So whatever that means to you, or whatever that could potentially mean for you, just prepare for that, because it can go in really any direction, especially when
Yeah.
you take a real high dose.
Yes, yes. Yeah. Man. Yeah, it's renewed my I've been away, even from the microdosing for a little while now, and it's kind of like I every now and then I have like this idea like I need to get back into that. It's having enough of them on hand is time consuming on its own, but I just need to restart.
Honestly, man, it's been a little while for me. I've been trying to, like, my journey right now is trying to like regain the courage I used to have, because I had a really, really bad experience a few years ago on 5 grams. And it was
Whew.
so bad. And now I haven't taken 5 grams since.
Yeah,
We used to take
these are dry.
dry. Yes, yes, dry.
Wow.
Yep.
Yeah.
So since then, I haven't taken 5 grams. I just haven't gotten back to that yet. So my current journey is like trying to reignite my courage to get back to the place that I was when I was able to just not nonchalantly, but sort of nonchalantly go into it without too much of a worry or a concern. Which then brings me back to respecting the substance. I guess we didn't respect the substance and it put us down for it.
Yeah, yeah. It's funny how, human ego likes to sneak in different places. Um, I remember I remember, a guy way back when, kinda bragging about his ego deaths and this and that, but, it got to the point where it was like, "Well, you got a lot of ego for your ego deaths." It was funny. But, yeah, human ego is a sneaky thing. It can sneak up on you, and that goes back. I mean, I think we're kinda talking about the same thing, like, um, if you're internally stuff isn't right or organized or something that you're not liking about yourself, uh, like, it's kinda just magnified to an extreme degree, and I would imagine that would probably be the instigator of the majority of bad trips, but I don't know.
Yeah, it feels that way. Or just, I mean, disrespecting the substance in general. Like if you're just not in a good headspace that day or that minute or that second, even, it can take a turn for the worse at any time. And I've had experiences where I've prepared perfectly and there's been nothing wrong, everything's great, and parts of the experience are really bad. But usually, when you get past those really hard parts, generally during the come up, the peak usually improves and it becomes a
Mhm.
beautiful, amazing experience when you can sort of get over yourself.
Have you ever stacked, outside of cannabis, have you ever stacked, psychedelics onto different psychedelics?
I never have. I've never had the balls to do that. Have you?
No, no, in my reckless days, there was, like, taking other stupid stuff you should not, or at least in my opinion, should not take with, but, like, Adderall, uh, Xanax, and alcohol and mushrooms don't really mix together, at least for me. Um, uh, so they're, like, stacking that kinda stupid stuff, but, no, I wish, I don't know, I you know what? If I did a mushroom trip I would probably try to stack it with sublingual salvia, and I go back to that because those are the 2 that I have the most experience with. I would imagine the, the the breakthrough clarity and just, like, all the neurons firing during a trip added you add that euphoric disassociative compound to it. I would imagine it would be nice, but I don't think I've ever stacked that before with it. That'll be for further research.
I would like to smoke DMT while on mushrooms. I think that would be kind of fun. See what that would be like,
Oh,
you know? Like would it
I
change the experience, do you think, or would it maybe like cancel out the psilocybin and just blast you away on DMT? I wonder.
I don't know. I have tried DMT and it didn't work. We got some. I did the whole. I mean, I did a bunch of research on it because I didn't want to waste it, and it just nothing happened. Um, and uh, it it has a pungent smell, right? It has a really particular. Okay, I think I had legit stuff, but nothing happened. And I've heard everyone. If there is one, I would do because I don't have like I wouldn't have to invest the 8+ hours. It would probably be DMT, and I would go in super humble because I wouldn't want those clockwork elves smacking me down. But that's something I want to ask you is because in this conversation of wondering how much is, neurons firing your own brain kind of creating a reality versus you're dissolving something to where you have more bandwidth to soak in actual reality, like which one is true or if it's a blend of the two. Um, the one thing that I always go back to is with ayahuasca, which I've tried to prepare, but I didn't have a what is it? What's the inhibitor that you have to
The
add to the vine?
MAOI inhibitor or the
Yeah,
MAOI, the monoamine oxidase inhibitor. What is it? Harmaline or Harmine or something like that
yeah,
they use?
it's from Psychotria viridis, which, by the way, what a badass name. A plant called Psychotria viridis. Um, I didn't have that inhibitor, so I did an experiment where I got the vines, and they're surprisingly easy to get a hold of, and they're extremely like if you have a cappy vine, it's a very particular kind of vine. Um, Ground it up, made a brew of it, and for good measure, because I wanted to see what would happen if I just drank the stuff. You do get a tummy ache if you just drink ground up cappy vine from a boiling pot. But for good measure, it's so stupid, but I threw in some Clonopin in the brew just to see what would happen. And me and a buddy uh uh drank it, and it was he kept saying he felt like he was in, Dragon Ball Z, like, the Super Saiyan weird thing. The way I would articulate it, it was like all your nerve endings were buzzing. It was extremely strange. No actual trip happened, but it was like a very weird feeling all over your body of, like, all your nerves I was hyper aware of, and everything was just vibrating, and I guess that's what he called feeling like like he was in Dragon Ball Z, but I don't know. Fun fact, he's a cop now.
Yeah, man. In terms of like whether or not what you're experiencing is like a dissolving of the veil so that you can see or experience more of reality, I feel like that's the way it is, you know, and my
Yeah,
intellectual mind wants to say, no, it's probably both, or like, you know, it's just my mind thinking that, or the experience itself is sort of influencing me to say that, but it truly does feel that way. It really feels like, especially with DMT, it like literally transports you to like a different place. It's weird because you feel like you're there, you're breathing, you feel your heartbeat. I remember I was noticing my swallowing. I was like, "Oh, okay, so I'm still in my body."
yeah,
That
yeah.
that was a very strange thing, and when I did swallow, it felt like the swallow was like an earthquake, and it just reverberated out throughout my whole body. It was very strange. But it's the weird thing about it is that you are fully yourself, you're fully there, but it's like you're transported to a different environment. All of reality is
Yeah.
just switched. Like the channel on the TV is switched to something else.
Okay, I have a question because I all right. It's really interesting you mentioned something really specific. So, when I tried DMT, I picked a great spot. It was like this old dock in the middle of a lake, lay down. I mean, after research of like, okay, you gotta get it real vaporized. You had to have like a medium on top. You had a pipe, and then I mean, I inhaled it all, held it in my lungs for quite a while, and just nothing I remember being so, like, put off by that, but the one thing you just mentioned was, like, you were aware of your swallowing. Anytime I have mushrooms or any kind of psychedelic, what the way I know it's about to all kick in is I'm extremely aware of like, the swallowing, sensation in my chest, like, right in here and, like, right in here in my neck. It's like this really specific feeling, and then everything just starts happening. But that's how I know it's all I don't know what that is. That's the first time I've ever heard anyone mention that.
Dude, I get that, and, my teeth as well feel a little strange, you
Interesting.
know? I get this weird, like, tingling sensation in my teeth, and, a buzzing begins to happen in my ears. It's like a zoo, and like a moving,
Whoa.
morphing buzzing. It's so weird. I have no explanation for the strange physical, stimuli and phenomena that happen after taking a psychedelic. It's fucking weird.
That is weird. Interesting. Yeah, and the other thing I wanted to ask was, okay, so one of the things that always kind of drew me to like the Cappy Vine and all of those kind of things were the stories. I've heard story after story where people go on ayahuasca retreats and they have group hallucinations of entities in different places, but they all see them, and they're usually somewhere where they're kinda just, like, watching, and then they go away. Or they're always there, but everyone is aware of them. The same thing in, like, DMT. Everybody comes back reporting that there is something there. There is, like, this high-pitched, fast thing that is occupying this geometrical space. And why that is so interesting is like, I don't know if you're too familiar with the gateway process that was, yeah, so that, the fact that our federal government through the CIA were funding experiments relating to DMT and other compounds and frequency machines to send military guys into a DMT realm, and they had all these different names for it, but the declassified papers are fascinating because they spent money to send soldiers into DMT space, essentially, into like a different dimension, and to try to bring back information. That is just so wild.
It's extraordinary, dude. Yeah, the gateway process is very, very interesting just in itself. But yeah, man, they also related those experiments to remote viewing, right?
Yeah, there was a lot of that stuff and out of body, practices, remote viewing, and they would also try to had, like, a main test that they did during, early MK Ultra days where they had cards with objects on them, and they tried to they would kind of give a score on, like sixth sense abilities where you'd be like, okay, there some people would have like really high scores knowing what was on the card that they couldn't see or what was in a box or this or that. Other people scored low, and they would rate the participants. They did a lot of crazy stuff between like the late 50s and the mid 70s. They're just really weird experiments that we weren't I mean, we were kind of aware of, but are more aware of now just from, uh, what is it? The Freedom of Information Act?
Yeah, and as like the esoteric and spiritual stuff starts to gain more traction culturally, we're starting to see and experience some of that stuff, and it's becoming, if it's not becoming unveiled to us we're seeing more of it regardless. We're able to do the research and take a look at it. And I mean, that's it's starting with the UFOs as well, man. They're really
Mhm.
they're coming down. Disclosure seems to be happening. It's really interesting to me. I'm
Yeah.
super excited to see what we have in store there.
Oh, man, if okay, so well, the thing that blows my mind. Okay, so I have like two opinions on all this UFO stuff. Sorry, there's like a crazy storm going on near me, which is fitting for this podcast.
Right.
I like storms; they're cozy. Um, so I'm getting a bunch of alerts. But okay, so I'm on two sides of the fence here. So either this is a giant psyop, like Project Bluebeam type psyop, where they're trying to figure out how many people they can dupe into believing they have UFOs or have come in contact with entities, or it's real and the kind of clandestine structure of the internal parts of our government are dissolving and this stuff is real and coming out because in my opinion this is like we're in the end of the empire, this is the decline of the empire, which is not necessarily a bad thing. I believe there's some opportunities there, but if you look at, all right, so these UFOs that the military, the Air Force are filming, they defy logic. There's stuff that's coming in and out of the ocean. There's stuff doing these flights that we have absolutely no idea how technologically in our framework we would do that. Either it's them doing it and this is a psyop, or it's real. And if it's real, I have like these other fragmented ideas, like the idea that something from a really far star system, I feel like is the lowest in my opinion. It's possible, but lowest. Like, okay, all a civilization would have to do is figure out how to like fold space time or something, and then these immense distances wouldn't be that far off of a concept. So if there's a civilization that's harnessed that idea of manipulating space time and they could get here in hours versus you know light years. Okay, there's that idea, or there are these beings that can shift in and out of dimensions that have always been among us. And then the third would be like, what if there is a okay, because there's a really disturbing experiment you can do with fleas. People probably heard about it. You can take fleas and put them in a jar, and they first off they can jump at ridiculous heights. But if you put them in this like 6-inch jar, they will and leave them in there for a while. They will all of a sudden be kind of hard coded to only jump that height. And multiple experiments have been done on this. And what's even more disturbing is that their offspring have the same effect without even being exposed to the jar. They're all have been kind of bred to jump a certain height. So this leads into like the most disturbing thought, if this is all real that the government is leaking. What if there has been a higher organism that has always been here, and we essentially are like cattle that have been trained. It goes back to the whole Fnord thing. Like people equate it with like the Seven Families or like um deep social conditioning and manipulation, where the word Fnord we use as a substitute to describe this word, but in reality, these this hierarchical um, humans have bred the lesser humans to respond to a word that we can neither see nor hear or read, but we hear it, and the only effect it has is we go into like a panic mode. So like they could say it in a news broadcast. The people that say it aren't really aware they're saying it, but it's been slipped into their script that they read, and then they are not aware they're saying it. They can't hear it or read it, but they can when they read it, they're not actively conscious that they're saying it, which then in turn creates panic in the public. They could put it in a newspaper, they could put it in a news broadcast, they could put it wherever they want and manipulate stock markets, manipulate panic buying, manipulate human behavior on a whole based on this word or words that we've been bred to like not consciously be aware of. So that's disturbing. But like forget about the seven families and all that kind of stuff, or like the Merovingians, but like think of it in terms of like the flea experiment. What if there's just a higher organism that's always been here? Maybe they're in the ocean, maybe they can like slip between the veil of our three dimensions of height, width, and depth. Maybe there's like the fourth or fifth dimension where they can just kind of hide and observe, and they've been always here, and we're just cattle to them. I think that's the most disturbing idea.
Definitely, yes. Or like, we're some sort of a zoo or something for a
Yeah,
higher level. Yeah. And in terms of the psyop thing, man, I think about that every single time I see any sort of news on the subject. I always have to ground myself with this whole idea that
yeah.
it is so very possible that the entire thing is a psyop. And I remember way back when Project Bluebeam was first being discovered as like a conspiracy theory. I remember people were talking about Project Bluebeam as like the rapture. They were going to bring Jesus back or something
Hmm.
like that.
Hmm.
And I said to like the people that I would talk to about it, I said, no, no, no. If they're going to do this, it's going to 100% be aliens and UFOs. They're going to do some sort of like a UFO invasion.
Yeah.
And when you start to like, I've been listening to a lot of people for a lot of years about this. And you got this guy David Grush that's coming forward, and a few other people, congressmen, who are saying that they've seen things or they've heard things, and they're beginning to paint this narrative that there's something to worry about. There's like a threat to this, and that makes me believe that it's potentially a psyop because I don't know, it just doesn't seem plausible to me, or at least maybe this is just like my ideas. It doesn't seem plausible that there's some sort of a real threat involved here, or there's a danger, because a danger or a threat would almost involve an opponent that, like us being the opponent, that is sort of on a level where we're able to inflict harm on the alien civilization itself. And to me, with the technology that's been shown, it doesn't seem like we're much of a threat. So I feel like maybe if there are higher levels of consciousness that exist through living beings throughout the universe, that they would probably inhibit a more of a compassionate stance toward other living beings the same way that we do toward other living beings that are on our planet, but probably to a higher extent because they would be more wise than we are. Because to me, the evolution of consciousness sort of coincides with the evolution of love, the evolution of compassion, the evolution of like maybe out of greed, because we anthropomorphize everything. We map ourselves
Hmm.
onto everything, man. And when we look at aliens, we're saying, okay, um, how human are they? Like we're assuming that they're very much like us. They're just a more advanced version of us. But to me, if you're a more advanced civilization, you've probably evolved out of greed, out of all the bullshit that we put ourselves through day after day after day. That makes up this stupid civilization and this dumb society that we find ourselves in the West.
Yeah. I would agree. Okay, so I have two things where you say I would agree. The idea that okay, if there is some civilization that is really far out there or whatever, or could either pierce the veil and get into our dimension or fold space time from a long distance and get here in a short time. If they could do that, well, if they were our opponents, it's game over. Like, why haven't we been exterminated already? A. So I agree with you. Like the idea of them wanting to inflict harm, where if they're already here or something's going on, I would think that I mean, the threat would come so fast or already have happened that like folding space-time, we're so outgunned compared to that kind of technology. So I'm not that worried in that respect. The what I am worried about is like whenever I have a lot of mowing I have to do. I have to mow a lot. But whenever I think of like how many just generations and populations of insects are completely wiped out when I mow, And it's not that I wish them ill. In fact, if I find a spider in my house or anything, I put it on a piece of paper and get it outside. Like, I'm extremely empathetic towards any life I come across. I try not to step on ants, I'm really careful. Because they're special, and like it's this incredibly complicated living thing, and it's like there's no reason to do any harm to anything unless you're in danger. So my whole thing is, like, when I'm mowing, I don't mean any ill will. It's just a byproduct of something that the ants cannot conceive of, like, mowing a lawn because you want your lawn to look nice. That concept is so far removed from them, they have no idea. They just know, every now and then, on, like, the seventh day, we have to, like, go underground because this catastrophe will happen. But what if there's, like, uh if we're inadvertently, most of us wiped out because of some just thing we can't even conceive of, like, the aliens have to mow their lawn, and just as a byproduct, they don't wish us ill, they're indifferent to us, and some of them even like us, but, it we're like, most of us are wiped out from their lawn mowing or whatever concept like that we can't understand that they're doing wipes us out. That's a scary idea.
Yeah, it sounds like a Rick and Morty episode or something. But you know,
Yeah.
I've heard Elon Musk talk about AI, and he said something that you reminded me of, and I think it was like, if AI, like, think about us, okay? If we want to pave a road, there's a reason for paving that road. It's important. We have to do it. We've decided we're going to do it. And if there's an anthill in the middle of a spot that we're going to pave that road, we don't give a shit. We're paving that road. We're demolishing that ant farm. So, I mean, if you extrapolate that idea to AI or aliens, I mean, you could potentially see a situation where we're just in the way. And if we're in the way, we're going to get killed or exterminated or run over or controlled or something, which then maybe lends itself to the idea that we could be cattle. We could be being used for something, energy generating biological systems that contribute in some
The
way, shape, or
Matrix,
form.
man.
Yeah, exactly. It may not be robots, it might be aliens that are giving us the matrix.
Yeah. Yeah, I just like the idea of ants down in their chambers with tablets, and they have, like, scribes trying to predict when the next lawn mowing is. It's like this terrifying cataclysmic event. They're like throwing bones on the ground and reading tablets trying to figure out when the next lawn mowing is gonna occur.
Trying to warn the next, the next
Yeah,
evolution or like the next generation, which
yeah,
lends credence to like Graham Hancock's theories of global cataclysms and ancient
yeah.
civilizations, trying to warn us to, hey, look up and make sure you pay attention to what's falling on you.
Yeah, it would be cool if, you know it's just weird. Whenever this country needs something, it's like, oh man, the budget. But anytime anything happens in any part of the world, it's like, what, $6 billion? Whoops, an accounting error. Whoops, this. But it would be really cool as a country if we got ourselves together, and made these giant, publicly accessible, like, vaults. Basically, kind of like Fallout, but bigger, to where the majority of just people near cities or in rural areas knew where their vault was, and everyone could, like, go underground in case, like, what is that belt of asteroids? It's called something that we're all worried about.
Oh,
Um,
I know
it's
this, but I
the
can't think of it.
Kuiper belt, the Kuiper belt.
Hmm.
So, like, yeah, we've got two astronomical things, if, like, everything is the way we believe it is, that we should probably think about. It would be something getting dislodged or falling into our orbit from the Kuiper Belt, in terms of uh, devastating asteroid impact, which there's tons of evidence on Earth that that's happened multiple times, or a solar flare. The last solar flare we had was in the late 1800s. It was when we had telegraphs, and apparently telegraph paper caught on fire because the EMP from the solar flare supercharged all the telegraph wires we had in the air, and caught some telegraph paper on fire. At least there's some documentation of that. So imagine this modern day with how much wires and satellites we have in the sky right now. I mean, cities would burn down overnight if we had like a really bad solar flare. And it seems like that's on a timetable. It's like anything else. There's like this kind of wavelength or frequency the sun operates in bursts. It like heats up, it cools down, it heats up, it's just doing all of these things. And then, asteroid phenomenon that who knows? Like those are things that we don't have a lot of eyes in the sky on, and every now and then they detect one. There was one a few years ago that passed us by very recently that would have been devastating if it hit, but it missed us by a small, well, compared to space, a small margin. So yeah, I would agree. I think we probably need to have like some ideas in place and it not be just reserved for the billionaires, building their mile underground bunkers that I've been hearing have been being worked on.
Yeah, I mean, that would assume that the people in power, whether it be the government, the shadow government, whoever, actually give a shit about us and care
Yeah,
if we survive, which I don't think they do. Maybe if they took
yeah.
enough psychedelics, they would, but who
Maybe,
knows?
there you go. Yeah.
But Seth,
Yeah, we need to get that.
yeah, man, I agree, and maybe we should, merge ourselves, merge our intellectual prowess with the wisdom of indigenous cultures, as I was saying earlier. But
Yeah,
Seth, man, this has been awesome. I'm so happy that you agreed to come on, dude. It's been a great conversation.
absolutely. It has.
I'd love to have you on again, so we can just continue it, man. But why don't you go ahead and tell people where they can find you, all the stuff you do, because you did mention some of
Oh,
your art, which is amazing, by the way. I really love your art. So can you tell people where to
oh, thank
find
you.
all your stuff?
Yeah, so on Instagram, I'm STHHR abbreviated, but if you type in STHHRS on YouTube, Instagram, you'll find me. And let's see. I have a podcast on my own called Sus Alkahest on Spotify and all that stuff. And then me and the boys, we do that stuff and weird podcast where we just discuss conspiracy theories, weird stuff, just anything that's just delicious and weird. And then yeah, and I'm working on a story called Leviathan that is kind of an ongoing movie project. Hopefully, the book comes out at the end of this year, possibly the beginning of next year. And yeah, that's pretty much it. I really appreciate you having me on. This was fun.
Yeah, man, it was awesome, and I got to come on your show again to make up for the loss of
Yeah,
the files there, and yeah, we can hit it up.
absolutely. I appreciate it.
Thanks, man.